Welcome to the MrBoxingguru podcast. Again, it is me, Sal, MrBoxingguru. Thank you guys for tuning in again. Quick housekeeping rules. If you guys like the podcast, make sure you guys rate it 5 stars on iTunes. I think it's the only place you can rate. Leave a comment. Always make me laugh. You guys are pretty good about that. Let's get started. Let's do things a little different. Again, every week is an experiment, so we're going to do things, I guess, non-conventional way. This week, the big fight, or the fight that I'm going to talk about. I mean, I know there was a lot of other fights, but of course, I know most of you guys have your news sources. I'm going to talk about the fights that I care to talk about, or the card that I care to talk about. In this case, it was the DAZN card. Interesting thing that happened in DAZN. I mean, we had, of course, Brandon Rios versus La Zorrita Soto. Great fight. Zorrita showed great skills, but let's talk about the undercard right quick, because it was Ivan Striker Delgado fought Hector Tanajara Jr. In a fight where most of us thought that Tanajara could outbox the kid, but we know that Striker could come as the fight got stretched into the later rounds and actually do his work and actually start working on Tanajara, but that didn't happen. We got a nasty headbutt, and that ended the fight a bit prematurely to some folks. I mean, look, the cut was nasty. I saw Tanajara and his father posted after. But let's talk about the fight where we actually saw from him. Tanajara kept him away, of course, as he should. Kid has a beautiful jab, and I think I talked about this in the previous podcast. Beautiful jab. He kept popping him. He never let him in. He never let Striker get comfortable. Because, again, that was the game plan. He was the taller, longer fighter, and the fighter with the good jab. Now, it was Striker's job to make it an ugly, dirty fight and just try to take it to him. He tried. He was starting to be successful. Striker was, and that's when the head clash happened. Now, me being the cynic that I am, and seeing those circumstances that have happened via, I guess, Robert Garcia, and I've never been one to shy about saying, you know what, this is the type of fight that's going on. But there's a proven track record in the Robert Garcia camp, and that track record is when the going gets tough, and there's a way out. Let's go ahead and take it. I'm not knocking it. On the contrary, I think it's brilliant. It robs the fans, but it makes their fighter fight another day. Prime example was Mikey Garcia, and I tweeted this: Mikey Garcia versus City Salido. When the going got tough, and yes, Mikey was beating the living hell out of Salido the first couple of rounds, and he dropped him like 2, 3, 4 times. I'm getting a bunch of times. I can't recall it at the top of my head. But he started working Salido, but Salido started somehow coming back. Mikey's nose ended up breaking it, and Robert, because he had all those rounds in the bank, decided to stop the fight. Again, I don't blame him. He had done the early investment in the fight and actually had his brother, in this case Mikey Garcia, up by so far that if they stopped the fight now, his fighter was going to win, and he did. So that was a good thing. And another time it happened where Gato Roman versus Javier Pelos Garcia. And again, it's always been Pelos always been a fan-friendly fighter when he was fighting, and the fight started getting tough on both sides, because I think Pelos had dropped Gato. And again, guys, we're talking about a couple of old fights, but just to paint you a picture, Gato versus Pelos was going on, and Pelos dropped Gato, again, early celebration, and then Gato came back and dropped Pelos, and then he was putting his hands on Pelos, then Pelos got cut. After the cut, Robert stopped it because, again, Pelos was honestly getting worked on. Now that I could look at it with clear eyes after many years, but Pelos was actually getting worked on in this fight. So the best thing that could have happened, especially since Pelos was on a comeback trail after, I think he had lost like 2 fights, so taking some time off and and whatnot. So the best thing that could have, or the worst thing that could have happened, is for the kid to, fight 2-3 times as in the comeback, in his comeback chance that he had again, and catch a loss. So what Robert did, because of that cut, he stopped the fight. The fight ended up in a draw, but again, it wasn't a loss. And in today's time, a loss is a huge step back for these kids. So Robert was able to stop it. We move forward, and that. I think there was a couple other fights. If I'm not mistaken, a Nonito Donaire fight, the same thing happened. So it's patterns that we've noticed from Robert Garcia, and again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing for his fighters. On the contrary, it's a great thing. It's a bad thing for fight fans, because they don't get to see what would have happened. And now we're assuming. So now we're assuming that a guy like Stryker would have closed the gap later on a guy like Tanajara. Again, we don't know, but what we can judge, and that's what the judges judged the fight on, was in the 4 rounds that they actually saw completed. Now, what did we see? We saw a kid, pop his jab for 4 rounds, and that's it. Stryker didn't do shit. He didn't do nothing. He didn't do nothing to say, I'm going to give him this fight. Who's to say Stryker would have came in and put hands on him? Who's to say that Tanajara would have done the same thing, which, in my opinion, looked like he was going to do that. He was going to continue to do the same thing, pop him with his jab, and make it an easy fight for him. You don't know, but what you do know is what you actually saw. So, and another thing, this was not Robert Garcia's fault. Again, like I said, there's a proven track record where Robert stops these fights. This was not a Robert Garcia stoppage by any means. This stoppage was a legit stoppage by TJ. And I even heard Robert say, watch, they're going to fucking blame me. You know what, Robert, I'll be one of the first ones to blame you, but we all know that didn't happen. So kudos to Robert. Kudos to Tanajara. Again, these are the fights that he needs to develop into the great fighter that I personally think he could be. And hopefully he gets tougher kids like this, because, kid looks like the goods. Again, doesn't have a lot of pop, but he has a beautiful jab. So kudos to him. On the main event, we saw a girl fight too. Sulema, I believe her name was, versus some Apocalypto-ish lady. But the Apocalypto-ish lady kind of put work on Sulema, and again, good for her. Again, I don't want to dwell too much on that fight, because it's not that I don't care. It's just that I didn't put that much mental investment in it, I guess you could say. So, other than that, I think the main thing was the main event. Look, the main event, this was supposed to be Brandon's. It's almost like a farewell tour. He fought, he's been trying to fight fighters with some way or somehow a name, but at his own level. And that's what I said on my last podcast. If you go back and check, I said this is responsible matchmaking. This is Brandon fighting guys, again, at his current level. Guys are not going to outclass him like Inocente Alvarez. Again, like Soto to a certain extent. Again, at least on paper, we thought, okay, this is a good fight for Brandon. Brandon's going to outweigh him. He's going to be strong. He's going to be able to lean on him. But again, kudos to Eddie Hearn and staff, because on paper, this was a legit fight. I said this was a legit fight. I thought this fight was going to be much better than the fight we got a couple of weeks ago with the fight that we got a couple of weeks ago at what is it, PBC. But again, it was in a way, but it was a great brawl. But it wasn't a great brawl that as a Brandon Rios fan you really enjoyed. We all saw we all remember Brandon. Brandon for either you love Brandon or you hate him. For one, I've always liked the kid. I enjoyed him as a fan, and I mean, we could go far. We could go back a couple of fights. I mean, not a couple of fights. I mean, halfway through his career. I've been following this kid halfway through his career, but I've always enjoyed the kid fight. I've always backed him up, even when the Twitter trolls are attacking him. Oh, this guy blocks with his face. This guy's a bum. He's a punching bag. But I mean, we got to think about it. I mean, I've been following Brandon since, I believe it was Telefutura days. I mean, when he was fighting 8-10 rounders. Even before his big introduction to the Showtimes and the HBOs, when he fought Manuel Perez, I mean, his big breakthrough fight when he fought Anthony Peterson. I mean, the guy that, and that's the type of guy Brandon is. I mean, Anthony Peterson, if you guys remember, Anthony Peterson was a great, again, quote unquote, a skilled fighter. Anthony Peterson, of course, he had his brother too. That was a very talented young man. But again, he was a great fighter, great skilled fighter that wasn't supposed to lose to a guy like Brandon Rios. Brandon Rios, goofy guy that not a lot of people took serious. That's just a goofball in the gym. Very just slow with his legs, slow with his movement, slow with his speech. But a polished, skilled fighter like Anthony Peterson was not supposed to beat him. But Brandon did. Brandon drew him into a fight, a dog fight, a type of fight that Brandon loved doing. And Brandon ended up stopping, or actually getting Peterson disqualified, because of the low blows. And that was his first, I guess, big Vegas fight where he actually, became a sort of a household name. And then, a few months later, he goes and fights for a legit title. And in that title, that was versus Miguel Acosta, nice, skilled, I believe it was Colombian fighter, if I'm not mistaken, not very sure. But he, again, same thing, again, fighting guys that are technically better than him. But he outwilled them. He outworked them. And shit, he outweveled them. And he got that belt. And immediately he turns around, and now Brandon's a big name. I mean, everybody wants to see him. Everybody wants to see the guy that screams out, "Me gusta." Everybody wants to see that Brandon Rios. So what do? Him being with the big promoter, which is Top Rank at the time, Top Rank sees a way to capitalize on this kid. So what do? They bring him to, at this point, the Home Depot Center in Carson, California. Of course, we heard now it's the Health and Dignity Center, the StubHub Center. Of course, we all call it the War Grounds. But he fights this guy named Urbano Antillon from Maywood, which has a hell of a lisp, and just the press conference itself made for good times, because Brandon was always the type of guy that liked talking a lot of smack, and Antillon, of course, he's a neighborhood guy, but quiet, reserved, but talk when he wanted to talk, and then it transformed into a great 3-round fight. I remember Brandon Watkins, I mean, they were a thing of beauty, talking about the full 10-15 guy banda, just walking him in the ring, and same thing with Antillon. I mean, it was just a fun event, and it was one of those fights that was only 3 rounds. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was the end of Urbano Antillon, which again, I think he went on to the medical field and became a nurse or something like that. But again, Brandon outwilled his opponent. Now, after that, we're talking about, and I'm sorry, because again, I've always been a big fan of Brandon Rios, and most of you guys that know me know that I know his career. Like, for example, the fight right after that. And again, it was another fight that we all went to. That was in New York. That was his fight versus John Murray, where, I think that's where HBO kind of debuted their 2 days with a fight or something like that it was called. And Brandon couldn't make weight. Brandon was all sucked up, cut a knee for a week. Somehow made weight. And just beat the living crap out of John Murray, a kid that's coming from the UK. For a shot at Brandon's title. Again, beat him 130. Again, another fight at 135. Again, but just brutal ass whooping. After that, if you guys remember right, I mean, this kid, Brandon Rios, clumsy kid, was gonna fight the ultimate Olympian in Yuriorkis Gamboa. Somehow, some way, Yuriorkis Gamboa never made it to the press conference. But who did made it was a Cuban kid by the name of Richard Abreu. Now, nobody knew who Richard Abreu was. Nobody knew if maybe even Top Rank paid the guy to just show up at the press conferences and call out Brandon because they needed an opponent. Where Richard Abreu wanted to fight, he was mandatory, and, they did just that, not knowing who or what this Richard Abreu kid was. Richard Abreu was all wrong for Brandon Rios. Richard Abreu was a defensive fighter that didn't care to entertain the fans, but Richard Abreu nonetheless wanted to go in there with Brandon Rios. He made Brandon miss. At points looked silly. Very close fight. It went to whoever you thought was the better fighter at the end of each and every round. In this case, I still remember, again, maybe I might be biased. I mean, let's admit, I'm always been biased towards Brandon. He's always had a special place in my heart. But nonetheless, I gave it to Brandon Rios. Richard Abreu was throwing one punch at a time, moving, backing away most of the time. Brandon was in there trying to make the fight like he always does, trying to lean on you, trying to just smother you with just punches. Richard Abreu did a good job at avoiding most of those exchanges and just kind of pop-shotting them, little by little. But again, very close fight, and that kind of showed folks, okay, Brandon can be beat. He can be a box as long as you give him angles. You make him. You can't make him as you can't make him lose. He can lose. He's not invincible. This brute kid from Kansas isn't invincible. So what does Top Rank do after that? They're like, you know what? Let's see what comes out of two of our guys. At this point, Mike Alvarado was actually a guy at 140, and Brandon. I mean, we all knew that Brandon was just killing himself to make 135. So. I think the responsible thing to do was move Brandon. We're talking about 2012. Move Brandon up to 140-pound division where you don't know if his power is going to carry. But and there's this kid that's been being molded, which is again Colorado kid, which is Mike Alvarado, and he seems to be a beast. He's seems to be a strong kid. Seems to fight in a familiar style of Brandon Rios. So why not make the fight? And what do? Again, they bring it to Home Depot Center in Carson, California, war ground, the place where magic happens in boxing. And what do we get? We get an amazing fight from both guys. I'm talking about both guys are monsters in the ring. Both guys just wanted to beat the shit out of each other. It almost seems like Mike wanted to box a little more to a certain extent, but Brandon will reel him in and just made it a dogfight. I believe it was the 7th or 8th round that fight ended. And I mean, Mike Alvarado's head was snapping all over the place. Some folks say that it was premature. I personally didn't think so. Once you see a guy's head snap back, it's okay to stop it, especially as brutal as the fight was. So again, they get stopped. Brandon makes a hell of a statement at 140 pounds. And now he's the guy to beat at 140 pounds. But again, there was was the fight stopped prematurely? Is that the type of fight? Does it deserve another go? And that's exactly what they did. And again, I was there. The fight was electric, and it was one of the most exciting fights I have been in live. So it was only right that on October of 2012, I headed my way. I went to see the rematch at the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. And what a rematch we got. I mean, usually when a guy loses by knockout, chances are he's going to do the same. He's going to lose again. The fights take a little out of you, and in my opinion, I think, at least to the naked eye, I mean, in general, I would have thought Mike Alvarado wasn't going to be the same after that knockdown. But Mike Alvarado, started boxing. Again, exchanges were great, but he never really let Brandon be that same Brandon. He started boxing, and he started doing what other fighters like Richard Abreu had done, and just box him. Try not to get lured in by Brandon, and you get a decent fight. And unfortunately, Brandon did lose the fight. It was very close. It was a very close fight, in my opinion. The rounds were very close, but Mike Alvarado was edging most of them. I think I gave that fight to Alvarado by maybe 2 rounds. Again, it was back and forth. It was good enough for Alvarado to win, but man, I personally wanted to see the rematch, and I thought that was the way to go. Now, at the same time, Manny Pacquiao, and again, Manny Pacquiao was, I think he had just gotten knocked out by Marquez, and Manny Pacquiao needed an opponent. And we know what Top Rank does. I mean, they're not going to throw their cash cow at that point. I mean, we're talking about 2013. Manny Pacquiao, after beating so many guys, we're talking about De La Hoya, we're talking about Marquez, we're talking about Diaz, Margarito. I mean, he was really on an ass-whooping streak. But again, he fought Marquez again, and Marquez starched him, and he needed a comeback fight. So, of course, instead of going to Mike Alvarado, which essentially, I mean, he deserved it. He did beat Brandon Rios. They went to Brandon Rios because he was now the more vulnerable opponent. Manny Pacquiao went and did what he wanted with Brandon Rios for 12 rounds and went on to fight another day. This fight in particular trips me out because the feedback that I get from a lot of boxing fans about Brandon Rios is that Brandon Rios is a ballroom fighter. Brandon Rios is the opponent, quote unquote, that got lucky. He's not supposed to be there. His skill level is not supposed to be there. His defense is not up to par with being in there with the elites. His vocabulary isn't that of a champion. But somehow Brandon Rios has been involved in these type of fights. And that in itself it's commendable. That in itself speaks volumes of him. He's not supposed to be here. He's not supposed to be in these big fights. He's supposed to be in at-home fighters, but he somehow managed a way to not get $1 million paydays, but earn those $1 million paydays. He deserved each and every one of those huge paydays he got for him and his family. He put himself in that position. Again, like I said, Manny Pacquiao did what he wanted to with Brandon Rios. You know, very tentative Manny Pacquiao. Of course, didn't want to go for the knockout. I'm not sure if he wanted to go for a knockout or not, but he boxed Brandon Rios as everybody knows. You know, if you have the legs to move around Brandon Rios, he's not going to catch. After that, again, we all know that Brandon gets those DQ wins. He fought the Argentinian Diego Chavez, which again, Diego Chavez was what he was, fun fighter, but very dirty, just like most Argentinian soccer players. And of course, we got the rubber match. Can you call it rubber match? Trilogy or whatever you want to call it, trilogy. Against Mike Alvarado. Again, Mike Alvarado wasn't the same. Mike Alvarado was getting arrested at yay hours of the night. Brandon ended up stopping Mike Alvarado fairly early. Again, but it wasn't. At least as a Brandon Rios fight, it wasn't a satisfying win because this Mike Alvarado didn't seem focused. It didn't seem he was all there. Mike Alvarado did take some time off with his family, and I think, as a matter of fact, I think he's still fighting, not on big cards or whatnot, but he's still building his career little by little. I mean, he knows. I think at this point he knows what he can and cannot do, and he plans to keep it that way. Other than that, I mean, that's Brandon's career, in my opinion, as a whole. Anything that came after that, I mean, wasn't a fight where Brandon should have been in. I'll give you an example. Timothy Bradley lost to some good brawlers, but Timothy Bradley's a hell of a fighter and fresh-legged fighter. At this point, when he fought Brandon Rios, Timothy Bradley was 32-1, a guy that can move around, move very well against other fighters. And I mean, again, you knew that wasn't in Brandon. Why even fight? And at this point, Brandon retired. I think Brandon had retired before the fight actually started. And he lost to Timothy Bradley. Timothy Bradley, saying Timothy Bradley doesn't knock anybody out, knocks out the great chin of Brandon Rios. Shit doesn't make sense. But Timothy Bradley got that win. I think that was his last fight, if I'm not mistaken. And he went on to call fights on ESPN. So that, again, Brandon took a long long vacation, I guess you could say, and did the worst thing he could have done to my heart. He went to the PBC. Somehow his fights kept getting postponed and whatnot, but he ended up getting a fight. Again, he fought Bradley in 2015. He didn't end up fighting again in 2017, and he fought an opponent of the name of Aaron Herrera somewhere in or Lancaster. I mean, for God's sake, who would want to fight in Meth City? But somehow the PBC and their great plans threw him out there. Fighter 32-6 fights at the time, but they figured that would be a great match just because I think Jesse Vargas had fought him or Jesse Vargas ended up fighting him eventually. But that's what you got. 2-year layoff and he gets that type of fight. I get it. That type of fight, it's you need a little wiggle room versus a guy like that to get the spider webs out of there. And then almost a year, maybe 8 months after, he gets the monster of Danny Garcia. Again, fresh leg Danny Garcia that had a somehow, no, I don't want to say controversial loss to Keith Thurman, but it was a very close fight where you could have given it to either guy. But again, he lost, and it's okay to lose. Danny Garcia didn't lose anything. He didn't lose a step or anything like that. So Danny Garcia gets a Brandon Rios fight. Now, this fight would have been great maybe 6 years before that at 140 pounds. When Danny Garcia was a beast at 140. He was a champ at 140. Brandon was getting to 140. That would have been a great fight, but not after Brandon retired, came back, took 2 years off, then fought a guy like Aaron Herrera, and now he's fighting a Danny Garcia. Now, Brandon, you could tell he had he was hungry again. He wanted to fight. Everybody had said, Brandon's going to get his ass whooped. He's going to get stopped early. A guy like Danny Garcia and fresh legs is going to be too much for him. Let's see what happens. And what happened is that he was in a fight. He was in a fight that, again, he shouldn't have been because Danny Garcia is just in a completely different level than Brandon Rios. But Brandon Rios was right there with him every step of the way till he eventually got caught and knocked out. And that's another loss that Brandon had. After that, Brandon, of course, took time, and then I think that fight was in February of 2018. Didn't fight again until he signed a deal with DAZN. He signed his deal with DAZN in 2018. And he fought November 17 versus one of the many ginger brothers in Ramon. El Inocente, the businessman. One of those Inocente. I don't know why these Canelo bros like to say things in English, but Ramon El Inocente Alvarez. He fought in Kansas Star, somewhere in the undercard, instead of being the main event because they wanted to put Big Baby Miller in the main event. I don't know. I guess now it all comes out because he was going to eventually fight Baby Miller. I mean, not Baby Miller, I'm sorry, Anthony Joshua. But somehow he fought when there was no fans there, and he ended up fighting for Eddie Hearn, and he fought Ramon Alvarez in a very competitive fight because, again, this was responsible matchmaking. I was okay with it. I said, if Brandon comes back, I've always said, if Brandon went to PBC, they're going to use him for all their elite welterweights that they have, that they're in a completely different level than what Brandon Rios is, which, again, Brandon was a career 135-pounder. But now he's fighting at a comfortable weight, which is, 150-ish? Again, pretty much whatever Brandon wants to come in at or whatever they make the contract to fight. But he's going to fight responsible fights that are at his level. Ramon Alvarez was tagging. It almost seemed like he was a bit strong. For Brandon Rios, it was too much in the first couple of rounds. Second round, I said, oh, man, this guy's not going to make it. He's not going to make it out of this fight. But somehow Brandon ended up knocking out Canelo's little bro or big bro, whatever it is. But he ended up knocking him out and somehow put some sort of relevance in his name. And that was back in November. Again, good fights. Responsible matchmaking fights. Then his second fight with DAZN is the Humberto Soto fight. That's what we're getting at to now. Again, I said it before. Responsible matchmaking. Humberto Soto hasn't He's a great 135 pounder. He went up. The one time I see him go down was when he moved up to 140 and he fought Lucas Matisse, which at the time was one of the most devastating knockout artists. His name was right up there with a guy like Triple G. He just had ridiculous power. Him and Maidana were just brute forces of Argentina that just came and just took over, and again, just strong individuals. Humberto Soto got stopped. That's pretty much the last we saw of Soto. I think he fought one of Frank Espinosa's kids as well. I think he got worked on that one. But again, it was an older version of Humberto Soto. Now he said, okay, him versus Brandon, the reflexes aren't all there, but if they want to continue to fight, instead of being used as an opponent, be an opponent to each other, and why not let the best man win? And the fight gets scheduled for February 23rd, which was yesterday. The fight is in TJ. So Brandon versus a guy, again, Humberto Soto, which literally is a taxi driver. He owns a taxi company, and sometimes he goes and grabs his taxi and drives people around in TJ. So the typical stereotype of somebody fighting a taxi driver, that's what Brandon did. And that's who Brandon last lost to. It wasn't a bad... I'm not bitter about this loss about Brandon, especially being a Brandon Rios fan. I'm happy because I get to celebrate the guy's career. I think he had an amazing career. Like I said, he was where he wasn't supposed to be. He made it. He beat the odds. And take it how you want it. He's in some way he should be an inspiration to most of us. Don't think you can accomplish something when you indeed can't. Look at a guy like Brandon Rios. He was never supposed to be here. Brandon Rios was the classic ballroom fighter, local club fighter, but he made it, and he ended up being a champion. And he ended up making a whole ton of money. Not unearned money, the PBC style, but he earned every single penny he ever made. Brandon Rios, it's been an honor to see your career. It's been an honor to follow you. It's been an honor to get in arguments with you on social media. Hope you enjoy your retirement. Hope everybody else enjoyed this podcast. With that said, this has been the Mr. Boxing Guru podcast. Thanks again.